Mr. Wayne at RealFixesRealFast.com. Today we're working on a '06 Jeep Grand Cherokee with a 3.7 engine. It's got 105,000 miles on it, and the customer's complaint was that it was leaking transmission fluid. We raised it up in the air and took a look, and it was pretty clear it was coming from the transmission pan. So we did a basic transmission service, but it turned out to be another problem. Here's what happened. We raised the vehicle up in the air, and it was pretty obvious that we had a leak. It was all around the transmission pan. So we dropped the transmission pan, changed the gasket, put it back up, thought we had it fixed, gave it to the customer, came back the next day saying the leak's just as bad. Now you never want to have that, that's a comeback, so this time we actually gave it a much closer look. Since we had a new transmission pan on it, but there was still fresh leakage there, what we did was just sprayed it all clean, wiped it down, used air, blew it all dry, filled it back up, put it in gear, and ran it with the wheels running, so the transmission moving, so we could see where the leak is going to come from. We'll take this little cover off. And with the cover off, you can see that there's an electrical connector right there. Now this is an '06 Jeep, and it has a NAG1 transmission in it. Now I wasn't particularly familiar with this transmission. It's made by Mercedes. It was during that time when Mercedes actually took over Chrysler. So it's a Mercedes transmission called a NAG1 that's in this Jeep. I wasn't particularly familiar with it, so I started trying to get some information. One of my trusted sources is Identifix. So I checked with them, and sure enough, there's several indications there of a transmission leak. So I checked with Identifix, and they indicated that there is actually an O-ring around a connector here that is usually the source of this leak. So we got the part number, and in here you can see that this is actually what is causing the leak. This actually sticks into the transmission, and as you can see there's two O-rings there which are causing the leak. We've got a pin that comes through and a little nut there that we have to get on to loosen this. So if you run into this kind of a leak, don't just assume it's the transmission pan. It's most likely these O-rings right here. Now we're going to change this. Just take a long, narrow little screwdriver, flat, and pop the electrical connector cover off. Now what you have up inside that transmission, these are the O-rings we're after. And you can see there's a bolt that goes through the back, but in order to get to that, on the inside, the wiring looms go through there. So to get to that, you have, if you look real close at these index marks, that's the position that it's in when it's locked in place. So to get this out, we turn this outer ring, and it should pop, and then continue to turn it, and as it does, you'll see this inner sleeve begin to push out. Now once that is down like that, to where you're locked in place right here, then this should pull out. Your wires are in there, and there is another O-ring right here. So when we go back together, we would do the same thing. We would insert this in here and turn this up until it's locked in place, and these two tabs should be locked right like that. And again, if you look at your indexes, they should be like that, and you're locked in place. So we need to turn this outer ring towards us. It is a pretty tight turn. It's going to seem pretty hard, but it should turn towards you. And now you can see that inner sleeve has moved forward. Can you see that? Mm-hmm. Push it all the way down. And now the harness should come out of there. And if you're full, you'll probably leak some fluid. I'm going to tuck this up out of the way. And you need a 7 deep socket, a little extension, and a 1/4 inch ratchet. You're going to have to put it on that bolt by using the feel method. It doesn't take very many turns, probably about 4 or 5 turns. Okay. And then it should pull out. You are going to lose some fluid. So there's the old piece and the new piece. Now since our O-rings are what's causing the leak, and you'll see this part here, it does have an O-ring, and the new one comes with an O-ring. Now since the O-ring's what's leaking, I'm not going to change the pins that are in there. Now since the O-ring is what's leaking here, I'm going to just change the O-ring rather than all the wires. Now if you did need to do that, right here there's a little keeper. It looks like this. You would pop that up, your wires would pull out, you could insert them in here and push that down again. But you're going to have a bunch of single wires. There's a really good chance you could get them confused. So what I'm simply going to do is take the O-ring off of this one and put it on there. So we're going to take the O-ring loose, take it off, put the new O-ring on. So we're ready to put that one back in. Now we're ready to insert the new piece. Now when we go to insert this, you'll notice on the deep side here, there's 3 indexes. One little pointed one and 2 larger ones. They have to be lined up correctly for it to insert in. Now with the new O-rings, you have to kind of shove it in there. So we have to push that in there and try and line up those indexes. Just rotate it around, and when you get the right spot, it should pop in place. And then push it in further. Now we're ready for the bolt. Again, you have to go get on it with the feel method. Now when you tighten it down, make it pretty good and snug, but don't over tighten it because that's real fine threads on that bolt. Now this with that insert, you can see that it's got 2 kind of like angled indexes and a straight index up here. So those have to be lined up as well. Now if you look inside there, you'll see those index marks that we have to line up with. Now we're ready for the harness to go back in. It inserts, and then you just have to rotate it until you find your indexes match up, and then it would push in place. Push it in place as hard as you can. There we go. There it goes. Once you get it popped in place, we should rotate the outer case, and you should see it pull it back in place. Then rotate it all the way to the top until your marks are lined up. Got a little bit more to go. There. So when you rotate this, everything's slimy here, but it should pop that in there, and you need to rotate it until these marks are all lined up. There'll be one last pop. There. Wow. There'll be one last pop, and believe me, it's a pretty hard little pop. But you can see the 3 different alignment marks there. They need to be just like that for that to be locked in place. Then the last thing down here is put your cap back on it. It just fits on there. It snaps in place. Then you need to put your cover back on, and then we're done down here. Now we need to go at the top and refill the transmission, which is a task in itself. Now it's time to check the transmission fluid. That leads us to another problem. When you go to pull the dipstick, you'll see that there's a plug in the tube, but there's no dipstick. Now that's not unusual. That's how this Jeep was shipped out. In fact, in any of these transmissions, there's no dipstick sent out with the factory. Now the reason that is because these transmissions have a very peculiar process that you need to go through to check the fluid level. You don't just simply fill it like many of the others and dip a stick in there and see how full you are. It involves the temperature being right in the transmission. So you're going to have to get yourself a dipstick. They do sell them. You can get them from the dealer or you can get them from the aftermarket. Here's the part number. Here's the company and the part number, and if you look down here, it applies to these transmissions, especially the NAG 1. So if you don't have a dipstick in any of these transmissions, this one would fit it. Now you will need to check your information source as to the right procedure so that you can follow it exactly. But basically it involves filling it to a certain point, starting the engine, letting it get up to normal operating temperature, run it through the different gears, and then they want you to actually look on your scanner at the transmission temperature, and then you put this dipstick in, pull it out and check it, and you compare the reading on the dipstick, and you'll see the dipstick is measured in metric increments. There's a chart that shows you what the reading should be in millimeters based on the temperature of the transmission. Now on this particular vehicle, when we went to fill it, when the transmission temperature was at the right place, we needed about 70 millimeters, so that's what we filled it to. Now at that point we're ready to put the plug back in, and I'm going to keep the transmission dipstick for more cars that will probably come in that will need this procedure.